Tomes are the most broken weapon type in Fire Emblem Fates. In the same game that nerfed javelins and hand axes to be unable to double, Tomes got to keep their unrestricted 1-2 range scot-free, while hitting on most enemies' lower defensive stat with solid accuracy. To balance this out, most units don't have the magic stat to use Tomes effectively, and the ones that do were hit hard in other areas, sometimes being considered among the worst units in their respective routes. But it seems like Leo missed the memo. Being one of Conquest's 3 pre-promoted royal siblings, Leo is one of the few magic users across all 3 routes that genuinely excels at base, so he can tap into the strengths of his weapon type like no other. That's why today, my friend Luke and I are going to spotlight the unmatched power of the second Prince of Nor. Welcome back! We're doing another one of these unit analyses, and now for the first time we're taking a look at one of the 4 Norian royals, namely, in this case, the younger brother Leo.
Yes, I think Leo is not talked about enough, to be honest. People generally agree that he's a good unit, but he seems to be pretty overshadowed by especially his other siblings in Camilla, Xander, and Elise in, at the very least, popularity. And not really many people talk about Leo, and that's kind of sad because he's honestly my favorite personally to use. So yeah, I'm kind of excited to get to talk about him.
Yeah, as far as the Norian royal siblings go, they have a reputation for being extremely powerful, and as we'll see, Leo is no exception, even though he may not always be talked about in the same vein as his siblings. We're gonna be approaching this analysis with the same guidelines as usual. I do want to give a brief comment on the this is not a meta-analysis angle. Blue and I both have an agenda here. We both think Leo is, at very least, under-talked about, and in my case, I think he's fairly solidly underrated. That's an angle of bias that we might have, so I will try to stick to making this impartial and just a regular unit overview, but when I have something to say, I have something to say. That's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, well, this isn't like a direct, like, oh, this unit is like the absolute best and you're throwing if you aren't using him. There's a lot of things that I feel people kind of get wrong about Leo that I feel like need to be talked about somewhere, and, you know, this is a unit analysis, so we're gonna do that.
But first we can just have a standard look at his stats and other aspects of his kit. So Leo joins at the start of chapter 14 with a lot of stats in a lot of areas, and he joins at a much higher level than the rest of your army is going to be at this point. He is promoted level 2, and his internal level makes it as if he promoted at level 17. And while it's possible that you have units that are that high at this point, it's pretty unlikely. So at the time that Leo joins, he's gonna stand pretty far ahead of the rest of your army. And that will eventually peter out as everyone else catches up thanks to the XP curve in Conquest. It's very kind to underleveled units and unkind to overleveled ones like Leo, but it is important to note because it does give him a very substantial edge for a couple maps after he joins.
Yeah, his join map in particular, he is on the same level of Camilla in chapter 10, where he is just so over-leveled past the enemy curve and past what your units are supposed to have, that he is just going to be absolutely decimating everything because he's just extremely overstated for the time he joins. So in that regard, he gets an extremely strong start, where he kind of just can do things for free because the enemies haven't really gotten the chance to catch up to him yet, so he just kind of gets to exist and chill.
Yeah, that's kind of a theme with Leo, is he is very free. There's not a lot you have to invest in him to get a lot of reward, because as we can see, even immediately at base, he has 20 magic, 16 defense, and slightly less notable, but still solid 15 speed, and actually 34 HP is really good as well.
Leo's biggest thing that he really has going for him is that he is like one of the best mixed tanks in the game. Obviously you have some other mixed tanks, notably there's Benny, who's like super tank 5000, but Leo has the benefit of having magical weapons, which are just stronger, and then he has the benefit of being on a horse, which is also extremely powerful, especially for the time he joins, because even though he can't fly, getting that extra 8 movement is still extremely valuable, because not a lot of your units are going to be promoted, not a lot of your units are going to have access to that kind of movement.
He's pretty different from the other units who have this kind of defensive profile, of which there's, like, not very many. He has a lot of HP, defense, and resistance, but he doesn't compensate by having a poor offensive profile. Really, his only kind of sticking point is speed, and, to an extent, skill and luck, which I'll get to. So, it's very easy to make him just kind of have no flaws. With a bit of speed fixing, he gets to live a lot of attacks, and put in a lot of work on the counterattack. And that's kind of just the perfect definition of a juggernaut. That's what he is.
And he's very cheap, because the strengths that Leo has are pretty specific to his starting class. Like, you don't really want to put him in another class. There are some exceptions, which we will get to, but if you just keep him in Dark Knight and give him, like, a good pair-up, that's pretty much his build for the entire game. And there's not going to be really anything you're going to need much more, especially since he joins at a time where he's extremely overstated. It's really easy for him to just snowball. You can just get him a ton of kills really quickly, really easily, and he's just going to keep leveling and keep being overstated and keep outpacing the enemies. And not many other units are going to be able to do that with as minimal of effort as he is going to.
Yeah, and unlike other exceptionally powerful juggernauts that join far above the level curve, like maybe FE6 Marcus, Leo's growths are actually really solid too, so he's never really gonna fall off stat-wise. He has a 65% magic growth, 60% HP, 45% defense, 50% resistance, and 50% speed. 50% speed is actually better than you might expect from someone like Leo. Leo has a reputation for not being that fast, but his growth is actually really solid.
Yeah, especially since Dark Knight already is not, like, a very fast class. So, 50% in a class that is considered decently slow is actually pretty respectable. On top of that, there's enough resources of speed, since a lot of the problems that he faces are pretty much slowly centered around that. He's gonna pretty much only want speed pair-ups, so he's gonna have that always in the background pretty much. Not to mention you have tonics, you have meals, you have rallies later on that are pretty much gonna make any speed problems he runs into pretty free to fix.
The other aspects of his kit are his power-up bonuses, tag team bonuses, and his personal skill. They're okay. Well, his tag team bonuses are actually kind of bad. You don't want crit. But a pair-up, I could see situations where you would want a male magical pair-up like Leo, even if his power stats aren't super optimized for the pair-up role, like someone like Charlotte. But, 2 magic and 1 speed is alright, and I'm sure that 1 resistance can come up somewhere.
The real value of his pair-up comes from the fact that he's in a mounted class. Really, it's just his class. Like, getting a free Dark Knight is pretty solid for a pair-up, because you get defense, you get movement, and then you can always switch to move even further with his 8 in his pre-promoted class privileges.
Yeah, absolutely. Dark Knight's class pair-up is really, really good. It's +3 magic, +3 defense, +1 movement, and that makes it probably one of, if not the best magical pair-up classes in the game. I'd say the only class that's really competing for that title is Onmyoji, but you don't have a lot of access to Onmyoji in Conquest, so that's fine. His personal skill... Yeah, go ahead.
It's bad. It's bad. It's just, like, completely useless. It is going to be very rare when you see this actually, like, make a significant difference, because usually an injured foe is going to take lethal on the second hit in most scenarios when you're playing this game. Unless you're doing, like, very minimal chip damage, this is probably not going to make any significant difference in any clear. I have had it matter in some cases, specifically chapter 17. It helps Leo deal extra damage to the resistant master ninjas. However, you're gonna be hard pressed to actually like play around this skill. It's not going to be something that you're gonna be actively like, oh, I can set up this enemy for a pragmatic kill. That's just not really something that happens.
Yeah, Leo has a bonkers magic set. If he's not one-rounding, then he will two-round. Pragmatic isn't going to get you over the two-round threshold most of the time. There's a situation where Pragmatic is kind of useful, and it's against Worry Fighter enemies. Not for the damage, but for the bulk. Because if Leo's fighting a bunch of Worry Fighter generals off on his own, he'll have to two-round them if he doesn't have any other units with him, since he won't be able to double. Well, unless he's using lightning, but assuming he's enemy facing them, he'll have to two-round those generals, and then the extra bulk from Pragmatic after the generals lose some of their HP can be kind of helpful, but it's only -1, which I actually didn't expect. I thought it would be more. I thought it would be +2, -2, but apparently not.
I have had this matter before, and I believe I streamed this even, where it did like actually make a difference in Leo's survival on enemy phase, but it's rare. It's like a 1 in every maybe 10 Conquest playthroughs where you use them, you'll see this actually make a significant difference, because Leo just doesn't need it. Like, he's very bulky already. He's very powerful already. He has a lot of magic and a lot of defense and a lot of resistance, a lot of HP. He even has a skill, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, where he'll just randomly take less magic damage. So it's like, he's fine. He's not gonna really care too much about the 3 damage and -1 damage taken.
It's not very impactful. It's not the worst personal skill in Conquest, but it's not great.
The fact that it can do something sometimes is already better than, like, 2 guys.
At least 2. If we take a look at Leo's personal stats without Dark Knight layered on top of it, honestly, Leo's personal stats actually aren't going to come up that often, because I don't think you're going to reclass him out of Dark Knight most of the time. But it's interesting, so we'll take a look anyway. He loses 15% defense growth out of Dark Knight. So, interestingly, he's not super duper physically bulky on his own merits. A lot of that is coming from his class, but that's fine because you're keeping him in his class anyway, so that helps out his bulk. Dark Knight's a very bulky class.
He's pretty similar to Silas in that a lot of his stat growths are just coin flips, and they will get better or not really improve that much depending on what class you put him in. And I think that really works out for him, honestly, more so than Silas, because thanks to Leo having a higher starting level, it's a lot easier to get him going. It takes a lot less brain power, basically, to get where he needs to be, compared to some other units that have coin flip growths like that. It can go wrong, for sure, because it is still a coin flip. He can just get, like, speed screwed or magic screwed even, but it's usually not that bad.
Leo having really high bases means he's not as reliant on hitting his growths as Silas. There are a lot of situations where he can do things just off of his base stats. And in those situations, you don't have to worry about hitting his speed growth, hitting his defense growth, anything like that. He'll just be okay. And that's a major advantage he has over a lot of other units who start unpromoted with a lot of levels to gain, meaning they have a lot more opportunity to get screwed over harder.
The most egregious problem, aside from the speed, is his skill. His skill and luck. More so his skill. It's frankly not good. It's a lot better than some other units, but it's still not ideal, and he's going to be facing a lot of hit problems, especially against more dodgy enemies like Samurai or Ninjas or Falcon Knights or whatever. However, he is a Dark Knight, and Dark Knight does get free access to Heartseeker, so that's going to help him pretty significantly. I think that if it weren't for the fact that he gets Heartseeker for free, he would actually be a lot worse. However, he doesn't face hit problems as badly as it could be because of the fact that he basically just gets to 100 hit for free.
I think Leo's hit issues are pretty overstated, in the same way as Nick's, because Heartseeker just makes them kind of a non-issue in situations where you can apply that. And since Leo is bulkier and has 8 movement at base, it's a lot easier for him to get into situations where he can fight a lot of enemies at one range, and then his hit issues disappear. There are situations where Leo's low skill can come into play, but I think the standard path of least resistance for Leo can get around it really effectively.
It's not as insane where you have units like Benny who don't even care about missing because he's so bulky that even if he misses, he's going to just survive anyway. Leo is less flexible like that. However, he still is one of the bulkiest units in the game. And as a direct result of that, missing isn't as big of a deal for him as it is for a lot of other units. Because unless he's getting another unit killed, he's not getting himself killed. And that will pretty much make it so that missing is not really as scary as it initially seems for him.
Luckily, the situations where he won't have Heartseeker applied are generally pretty limited. Most enemies in this game will attack you at 1 range. There are a couple that will attack at 2 range, and those are going to be like sorcerers, or the occasional like battering club or spear enemy. Spears you gotta watch out for. Battering club, he has weapon triangle advantage, he's fine.
The biggest issue he is going to run into is fighting sorcerers. Sorcerers do have pretty respectable avoid against him, and he can struggle to hit those. However, most of the other enemies he's going to be completely fine with, because things like battering club, not only does he have weapon triangle, but also they're on mostly like Onis, right? They're on enemies that don't have any avoid at all. He's gonna be okay. The other side of that is a lot of the enemies in late game Conquest have bows that attack from 2 range. Bows are notably weak against tomes, so he's going to have weapon triangle advantage pretty much in 90% of the scenarios where he's going to be fighting at 2 range. And the few situations where he's not going to be able to do that aren't really that scary, or you could just use a different unit for them.
Also, what's nice is a lot of the 2-range enemies are just like the 1 2-range enemy in that group. So if Leo just attacks them at 1 range on player phase, he doesn't have to worry about it. So he's fine.
Alright, so Leo's class options are okay, they don't look bad. They're honestly some of the pretty higher end stuff that he would probably want. There's notably the fast support with Niles. This is probably his best one for his friendships, for, you know, just the sake of getting move +1, lucky 7. That's going to fix his hit rates even further. That's going to make him move even further. Lock touch is nice, I guess. And then he can just reclass straight back into Dark Knight or whatever, or just stay in Bow Knight or use like the Shining Bow or something. I don't know. I think that his best option here is actually Adventure, just because he has a respectable enough strength stat to where switching to bows for a brief time isn't that bad, and then he can use the Shining Bow, or he can just go back to a Dark Knight class or a Sorcerer or whatever. He pretty much gets free skills for $0, for $4,000, but you know, $0.
$0. 4,000 gold. Gold is not dollars.
True.
Leo is an interesting case where, like, his base class is his best class, so a lot of the time he doesn't want to reclass. But the classes he can access are situationally nice for skills. Adventure is the best one, like Luke said. Move +1 and Lucky 7 are 2 of the best skills in the entire game.
Especially for a unit like Leo. Pretty much the only reason why Leo, in his like general, you know, base build, would want to reclass for skills is for more hit. Because he's good on damage. He's good on, you know, speed. He's good on defense. Well, he's not really good on speed, but that can be fixed in other ways. So yeah, he doesn't really need much from anything outside of his class. He does uniquely get Odin friendship, and he and Odin are in the same class, so he actually gets Odin's Heartsteel class, which is Samurai. So he can be a option for your life and death sorcerer if you really want. It's not that good. Vantage Leo does sound like it could be pretty good, and obviously, you know, Vantage Juggernauts are strong, but Leo is definitely one of the weaker options for that, because he does have lower skill, and obviously Vantage builds are gonna be fighting at enemy phase 2 range. So he's actually not a good option for doing that, and it's kind of more of a meme choice for him.
Vantage guard stance units are a very different kind of enemy phaser than just standard, honest Dark Knight. And in Leo's case, I think worse. Because if you miss twice in a row, which is very possible, then the enemy will break your guard gauge, and then you will die. Because if you're under half HP and you have life and death, you're dead.
It doesn't matter how bulky you are going to die very fast, and you want to be at half HP because you need Vantage active, so it's just like, it's a really tough scenario where I would say that of all the popular options for life and death Vantage, don't do Leo. Leo's not the one to do it with, because he already has like a skill issue, and he already is in a pretty comfortable class anyways. He doesn't need to change the way he enemy phases. He already enemy phases perfectly fine.
If you want to do something funny, sticking in Swordmaster and just being a combat Swordmaster is funny, because that gives him a lot of speed, and he has innate sword rank, so if he sees 30 combats with a sword, he can use the 11 sword, which lets him use his magic stat again. And now he's fast, so he doesn't need as much speed fixing. The issue is everything else. The 11 sword has 80 hit, so that's gonna cut into Leo's accuracy compared to the Fire Tome. And Swordmaster's a lot less bulky than Dark Knight, and it has 2 less movement. So it's worse in almost every way, but it is fast.
It is definitely a very fun strategy, and also there is merit to at least getting Vantage sometimes, because getting Vantage and then going back into Dark Knight could be pretty good. Vantage is still useful. It can save you in a lot of situations. You can do cool things like dual Vantage attack stance. That is like the Vantage Leo strat, really. And it is very fun. However, it's not gonna be like a crutch for him.
Yeah, it's situational. If you're gonna put Leo in one of his friendship options for skills, Samurai is not the one I would recommend. I would say both Outlaw and Cavalier are easier to justify. Cavalier is another class that has innate sword rank, so if Leo's been building his sword rank, he'll be able to use the 11 sword. And the skills he gets from Cavalier are, I would say, better than Vantage. Elbow Room is a free +3 damage, which can occasionally help him reach thresholds without as much stacking. And then Shelter is one of the best utility skills in the game. It kind of breaks a lot of Conquest formations. If you make a unit do some player-based combat, then just Shelter chain them out of the way of everyone else. That's one of the funniest ways to use Shelter, and it's actually one of the best ones as well. And also, Shelter pairs well with Azura's Song and get a second dance out of her. That's the common trick that people bring up with Shelter.
Yeah, Shelter, Elbow Room are all very good, and you can get them in 2 levels, so if you really only want the skills, then you can just grab them and then go back into whatever class you want for Leo. And honestly, there even is some merit to Defender. Defender, since he's kind of just like an insane enemy phaser, obviously getting more stats on pair up is going to be very good for him. The other skills are kind of useless.
Outlaw is, in comparison to Cavalier, a little bit tougher to work in while you're just gaining levels for your skills, because, I mean, you could go Bow Knight, and then you would be able to use the 11 sword, but if you're going into Outlaw, you probably want Lucky 7, so you probably want to go Adventurer. And in that case, he will have E rank bows, and Leo's strength stat is not high.
It's workable. It's similar to Niles. It's a bit worse than Niles, if I remember correctly. But it's similar in that, like, it'll do its job for the time you need it to. Worst case scenario, you can just do some, like, dual strike stuff with him and, like, chip damage kills. But his strength is normally workable enough to where if he just fights some cheap enemies for a couple maps, then he'll be okay.
The payoff is absolutely worth it. You will feel the impact of those 2 skills. The training arc it's interesting. Probably the best way to take advantage of it is you can have Niles' friendship built if you save Paralog and Invasion 1 for after Leo joins by Chapter 17, and then he can use bows against Ninja Hell, and bows are the best weapon to talk about Ninja Hell. It's not trivial for him to reach the thresholds. He has, I think, 10 strength, which is not great. It can work. You could give him, like, if you've been, like, power leveling an early promoted Charlotte or something and give him a rally strength, and that'll probably help him a lot. You can give him maybe a Keaton backpack or something. And that could be a good way to get him those 3 levels. That's probably the best way to go about it without slowing down for him. But as a training arc, I'd say he does feel his, non-existence in the early game in that case. Someone like Outlaw Nyx gets to exist for a whole stretch of maps where bows are good. Chapter 10, Chapter 11, 12, 13, 14 are all maps where bows are really good, and the strength thresholds are pretty trivial. And Leo doesn't get to be in a bow class for any of them. He really does want to get power level in 17, or just like a shared route power log or something.
And then his Heartseal class is actually, I think, not bad for him. Don't go Butler. Never go Butler. Butler is bad. But Strategist is actually, pretty good. If you want to put Leo in a support class, he can do that. Gentium is really good. Rally Res can be useful, maybe, sometimes, rarely. But then at level 15, he can get Inspiration. Inspiration is obviously an extremely strong aura skill that's going to help out a lot of units. His naturally higher survivability lets him be a lot more aggressive than some other units that have access to this skill. However, reclassing into this class does lose him a lot of bulk. And most importantly, he keeps his tomes. He really wants his tomes. That's kind of the biggest thing for Leo, is that while he does have a strength stat, he really can't function as a phenomenal unit without using the magic stat, because he's just so much stronger with it. Because his strength just isn't really going to outrank really any other physical unit on your team.
Strategist is statistically, I would say, worse than Dark Knight. You lose 5 defense in exchange for 2 speed, which is not worth it. But Leo has 2 free skill slots in his kit, because Steel Magic is not very good. So realistically, the skills from his innate class that he wants to keep are Heartseeker, Malefic Aura, Life Taker, and that leaves room for 2 support skills like Shantium and Inspiration, or, 2 of any of the skills from his friendship classes, like Elbroom Shelter, Move +1 Lucky 7. That's really the best way to fill out his kit if you're the kind of person who, gets annoyed seeing a unit who doesn't have all their skill slots filled. Troubadour, or Outlaw, or Cavalier are all ways to take him a little bit higher.
He's very much a skill dipping unit, but his options for skill dipping honestly are really good. They're probably as good as you're gonna get. Honestly, I would say that Cavalier and Outlaw are maybe his 2 best options for unpromoted skills, just throughout the entire catalog of classes in this game. So it's just really convenient for him that he gets that with fast supports too, mind you. He has fast supports with all 3 of these units, so it's just really nice.
And there's actually one other reclass we have to talk about here, and that's Sorcerer. So since Leo starts as a Dark Knight, he can't use a Master Seal to promote into Sorcerer like someone like Odin. He has to use a Heart Seal for that, which is not really worth the cost before you get Infinite Seals. And then after you get Infinite Seals, I don't really see it.
You lose so much for 2 magic. It's not gonna matter. It's okay, you can maybe do some funny stuff with Vengeance. Pragmatic Vengeance is a really funny meme. But that's about it. He does not need this extra magic. Magic is so powerful in this game that reaching thresholds for kills with magic is probably the easiest thing to do. So, even against resistant enemies like sorcerers and stuff, he's not going to have that hard of a time to the point where he needs to be reclassing. The only time that he absolutely 100% needs Sorcerer over Dark Knight is if you're doing that Life and Death Vantage build. And it's really not worth it, to be honest.
Leo is not a unit that struggles reaching attack thresholds in Dark Knight. If he needs a bit of stacking, the stacking that he needs is not a Heart Seal. It's, it's tonics, it's a meal, it's power up. The Heart Seal is really the last-ditch effort, which he'll never need.
You lose 2 movement and all this defense for access to Nosferatu, which he's probably not going to really use, and then an extra 2 magic.
Nosferatu is bad because it has 70 hit, and Leo, we already went over his hit issues. He's fine with the Fire Tome. Take him off the Fire Tome and you will suffer. Nosferatu is a lot like Vantage, where you need to hit with it or you will die. And Leo can't afford not to hit with it.
The only unit that can really comfortably use Nosferatu is Odin, because he has that insane skill and luck stat. If you try to use Nos with any other unit, you're going to be facing so many hit problems. And it's like, oh my god. It's one of those weapons that are just like really only catered to specific units, and those specific units are not Leo. There is one other class that we definitely should not skip over, which is Wyvern. Everyone loves that. Everyone loves Wyvern. It's everyone's favorite class. He has to marry Baruka for it. He cannot marry Camilla. Honestly, it's a little unfortunate because he does have a fast support with Camilla, so it would be a lot quicker to get just S support with Camilla and then get him into Malignite or whatever. But this game isn't that insane. so we're gonna have to go with Baruka, who is a decent option for him still. Getting him that extra bulk pair up is really good. Even getting that extra strength could be nice sometimes if you're trying to like sandbag with him, or like maybe even build his sword rank for some reason, even though you're going Wyvern. But yeah, he pairs well with Baruka and gets an insane class out of it. He gets pretty much Dark Knight, but it flies now.
No, you're actually just right. That is just Dark Knight, but it flies. Statistically, Malignite is almost identical to Dark Knight. So, most of the time, Dark Knight is the one class that Leo's going to stay in long term. Malignite is the other contender. The only other contender, I would argue. But, interestingly enough, I wouldn't call it a straight upgrade. I think Malignite is a side grade to Dark Knight for Leo. Because Flight is obviously very good, but the bow weakness is actually kind of relevant because Leo's the kind of unit who a lot of the time does want to engage in enemy phases against bow units like the Chapter 23 snipers and the Chapter 24 Kinshis. So attaining a bow weakness is going to make him a lot worse for those tasks, which is kind of unfortunate because Chapter 23 and 24 are the two maps that you would, in theory, want Flight on the most. But Chapter 24 is honestly the map that I think Dark Knight most outclasses Malignite. There are a lot of things that infantry can do on those maps that flyers just can't replicate, and Leo is the best showcase of that.
The really nice thing about Malig over Dark Knight is the fact that obviously it flies. He can just ignore terrain. However, it isn't as relevant for him as it may seem, because obviously you're going to have other flyers on the team, and you're not going to be really hurting for Leo to be like a magic carry Malignite, because then you kind of lose the one niche that he really gets frequently, which is being able to comfortably plop into literally any type of enemy formation and just survive it. He's not going to be able to as comfortably do that in this class, and I think that does hurt him more than help him. However, Malig is still extremely strong. So, it's still not bad. I do want to point out that Savage Blow is awesome for him. It just gives him pragmatic procs for free.
That's true.
Yeah, like if he attacks into like a big group of enemies, he's going to get a ton of pragmatic enemy phases, which are going to be good for both his damage output and his damage intake, which is obviously nice. And then trample plus 5 damage, insane skill.
I didn't even think about that. That's really insane that Savage Blow is...
No, yeah, it's like really good for him. Also, Lunge, yeah, everyone likes Lunge.
Lunge is a solid positioning skill that you can take advantage of sometimes. Swordbreaker is theoretically nice, but that requires putting Leo in Wyvern Lord, so don't do that. Don't put him in Wyvern Lord.
I mean, he could use the Bolt Axe and miss, but
Don't worry about it.
It's not ideal.
He doesn't have an 8 axe rank, so he's not as good of a bolt axe user as the Lemon Sword, especially since he doesn't start in an axe wielding class.
Yeah. So just to give an example of how insane this guy is, this is his combat versus a Berserker in Chapter 16, which is 2 maps after his join time with Leo's base stats alone. He completely destroys this guy. Berserkers are extremely scary enemy phase enemies because they have a ton of strength and they hit really hard. But as you can see here, Leo's just completely fine against them. Not only does he not take that much damage, not only does he double and kill with a little bit of speed help, but he also has an insane avoid against him because of the fact that he gets weapon triangle advantage against a lot of the scarier enemies in this chunk of the game. So the fact that you just get this guy for free is is kind of insane, because he's just like the universal solution for this is a giant group of scary mixed enemies. Let me just put Leo here. He'll be okay.
This Berserker is basically shorthand for how Leo performs on Chapter 16 as a map, and the answer is, well. The Berserker is the scariest enemy that you'll find on the map, and everything else, especially the unpromoted Dark Mages and fighters, are absolutely no issue for him whatsoever. Leo is, I would argue, the best unit in the game on Chapter 16, and maybe 14.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree that he is like... He temporarily does outrank even Camilla. He's so bulky, and with like a little bit of stacking, like if you just give him a tonic in every stat or whatever, he can literally just solo the map by himself. He's chill. Like I even have a video on my channel where Leo with 0% growth solos this entire map specifically because I wanted to show how easy it was. Spoilers, very easy. It is extremely easy to just solo this map with Leo and only Leo with his base stats. It's kind of insane.
That's a very good indicator of how overtuned this man is for the point that he joins, and he'll remain very good even once the enemies start to catch up to him. He has pretty similar performance. He never really falls off. On this map, I have given him a Selena pair up because I wanted to talk about Selena. So Leo's marriages are going to be a lot more focused on the pair-up stats they give him rather than the classes. Baruka is really the only unit who gives him a class he might want that he can't already get. But I would say Selena, and as we'll see, Felicia and Nyx, are some of Leo's best wives for improving his combat performance by giving him the speed he needs to reach the thresholds, and in Selena's case, a lot of skill and defense. And skill is really good for improving Leo's accuracy in the situations where he doesn't have Heartseeker applied. And defense helps him survive even more enemies, so he'll really just have no issues whatsoever. So I think, either a hero or a Bone Knight Selena can really skyrocket Leo's performance. And he often doesn't need that much magic stacking, because magic is his best stat. He has 20 magic base, 65% magic growth. He's gonna be fine on magic. So if you want to give him more of the stats that he kind of wants more, then I'd say Selena is one of your best options. The thing with Selena compared to Nyx and Felicia is she's going to be more contested because she is a good wife for both physical and magical units. So there's a wider pool of male units who want Selena pair up. So a lot of the time, Leo does get saddled with Felicia or Nyx. But if you can spare Selena pair up, that'll help him out a lot.
And to reiterate the magic point, the only time he will really ever run into magic issues, he's mostly fighting enemies with low resistance anyways. Because Fates in general, Fire Emblem in general, doesn't have a lot of very, resistant, heavy enemy formations. So that basis alone, he's going to be fighting a lot of enemies that are just, really free to hit damage thresholds on. It's really not going to be a problem unless he's fighting sorcerers, which, with some help, it's really not going to be that big of an issue.
I mean, hey, if you're running into damage issues with a Leo who has married Selena, dip into Hero for 2 levels. You'll get stronger posts, and everything will be fine.
True!
Hero's not a terrible skill dip class for him. I don't think Soul is very good.
More bulk!
But, yeah. Stronger post helps him hit thresholds. If he's marrying Charlotte instead of Selena, he can get HP plus 5.
More bulk!
Which is really nice. Charlotte is surprisingly not that bad of a wife for Leo, but I think she has other things she wants to be doing.
Yeah, she wants to marry a physical unit, for sure. But it's definitely not bad. Getting Leo access to Hero is definitely one of his less bad skill dipping classes. I'm not gonna say it's great.
He can use the Lemon Sword.
He can use the Weapon Sword, but it's not gonna make as big of a difference as you might think. But it works.
So that's Leo's base performance in a vacuum. If we want to compare it to the other strong pre-promoted royal that you get at this stretch of the game, we can have a look at how he matches up against Xander. These are both of their base stats. And we can see, just, for reference, as you might expect, Leo is leading a lot in resistance, so he's going to have a lot more magical bulk, but Xander specializes a lot in physical defense, so he's going to be better at taking on large groups of physical enemies. But for the mixed groups that are pretty common in maps like Chapter 24 or Chapter 20, those are situations where Leo is going to really shine. And so those are different situations where you might want to use one royal brother or the other.
Honestly, they're pretty comparable in how they perform, if it weren't for the fact that Leo just has such an insane res lead. Because these guys are enemy phase beasts, right? With some speed help, they're just insane. I would go as far as saying that in a lot of scenarios, if you're just kind of building them standard with not too much effort, Leo actually has the edge on Xander because of the fact that Leo hits on magic instead of hitting on, strength. So Xander, while he does have a higher base attack, is going to actually struggle a bit harder in some scenarios to reach kill thresholds because of the fact that he's hitting on defense, which is just a harder benchmark flat out.
Also, interestingly enough, since Xander has a higher internal level and also starting level than Leo, if we put them at more comparable levels to each other, Leo's going to start leading in speed over Xander, which is actually pretty nice. Being slightly faster means he doesn't need as much help to reach speed thresholds, or maybe you'll run into situations where Leo can hit a speed benchmark that Xander can't. And that's really nice. And I would say the biggest difference between these two units is their hit rates. Taken at face value, they might seem to have pretty comparable hit rates, but you gotta remember, Heartseeker is minus 20 avoid to adjacent enemies. And there's a lot of enemies that are gonna attack these guys at one range. And in those situations, you might find that your Leo has perfect hit, and your Xander has like 86. And those are situations where the extra reliability really comes in handy. So that's something I really appreciate Leo for. Since Xander, if he wants to be using his big 1-2 range enemy phase weapon, he has to use Siegfried, which is 80 hit as a sword. The weapon type that does not give hit at higher weapon ranks. And Leo, especially once he hits B rank tomes, which does give him +5 hit, is going to be a lot more accurate than Xander in most situations. I would say Heartseeker is going to be applied a lot more often than not, which makes her a pretty substantial difference. Against mixed 1 range and 2 range groups, which there are a lot of, Xander can't just switch to the bronze swords and expect the same output. So these are especially the situations where Leo really starts to outclass him.
Yeah, Xander is obviously still very good. I would say that he is still the most brain dead unit in the game, but maybe that's a story for another time. But he does have hit problems with Siegfried specifically, and I don't think that Siegfried is really all that in comparison to just a regular magic unit, because on top of the worst hit rates, he's also got to deal with the worst weapon rank bonuses, he's got to deal with the harder benchmarks, and generally worse class lines. So it's a little rough for Xander in a vacuum.
There are ways Xander can fix his hit, but they're gonna require a bit more investment, like going into his friendship classes, like Master Ninja to give him the Bronze Dagger, or Dark Knight so he can get Heartseeker. But if we're taking friendships into account, Leo can just go adventure and get Lucky 7, and now he still retains his +20 hit lead over Xander, which is really funny.
It's kind of ridiculous. I mean, Xander, like, he does have decent hit. It's not even like Xander has, like, really bad hit. It's just Leo's, with his skill access, is so good that he doesn't really run into that many problems, and it really gets overstated. Especially when you have units like, Malagalice getting really popularized when she has awful hit. So it's like, there's definitely some community bias, I feel like, against him.
Yeah, I would say Leo is a very dependable, honest Juggernaut. You know what you're gonna get out of him whenever you plot him against a group of enemies. He's gonna hit twice, he's gonna kill the enemies, and he's gonna survive. And he can do that pretty reliably with the Fire Tome. Xander might crit, he might miss. So in that way, I generally prefer Leo for a lot of tasks. That's my personal preference.
So we talked a lot about the Fire Tome, but obviously that's not the only weapon in this game. We need to start with the Levin Sword, I think, because that's his natural, second weapon, right? He starts with an 8 sword rank. He starts in a class that can use swords, a magic class that can use swords. There's a magic sword. It has 11 might. That's really strong. It's not good at all.
Whoa.
For him. He's a really bad user of the Levin Sword, I think. And here's why. Swords and tomes are on the same weapon triangle, right? And we spent all this time talking about how Leo's hits kind of need to be fixed. They aren't fully 100% unsalvageable. However, in most situations, he's not going to need the extra might from the Levin Sword. He's going to just rather use the tome. He's going to get the one round anyways, and he's not really going to have that much of a problem without using it. I feel like using combats to raise his sword rank for the Levin Sword is sort of a waste of time for him, because it doesn't really give you anything that you don't already have.
I wasn't expecting that, actually.
Really?
No, I wasn't.
I'm super anti Levin Sword Leo.
I didn't know that. I'm a lot more positive on the Levin Sword generally. I think the Levin Sword compared to other magic weapons like the Bolt Axe is generally still fairly reliable. It's still a lot worse than fire. It's 10 less hit than fire. But 11 might is gonna help him reach the really tough thresholds, which there aren't a lot of, but does come up. It'll come up on when we talk about endgame in I don't know how many slides. And I think that's nice, especially when you put it in comparison to Brynhildr, which is a very similar weapon on the surface. Brynhildr has 10 might, which is 1 less than Levin Sword, and 80 hit, which is the same as the Levin Sword. But if you're at B rank tomes, it'll be 85. But the thing with Brynhildr is that, unlike the Levin Sword, it can crit. And Leo is a unit that, more than any other, is disproportionately negatively affected by crits. Leo's the kind of unit who wants to be fighting a lot of units. So he's very reliant on having his Gargage procs. It can get kind of exact in how you want to be proccing it. So the consistency is nice. I think the consistent high might really goes into what I really appreciate about Leo, is that he's the consistent juggernaut. And that's useful in the situations where he wants to be dealing a lot of damage. Brynhildr has its uses. I think, unlike Invasion 2, it's really nice against the merchants. But overall, you're putting yourself at more risk when using Brynhildr compared to the Levin Sword.
I definitely do agree that Levin Sword is a better alternative to the Brynhildr because of the fact that it can't crit. I kind of don't see the extra damage being too useful. Obviously, those situations are kind of rare. I kind of want to see that in-game example you're talking about, actually. In general, he doesn't really need that extra might, because hitting on magic is just so free, and for the most part, he's going to have a good magic pair-up that he can have, with Nyx or Felicia, where, that extra might from the Levin Sword may not be that useful. Obviously, there are situations where it can come up. However, I personally don't value it that much. I guess it kind of just depends on your playstyle, but I don't think it's as important.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think I would value it more if Leo started at C swords and you didn't have to actually spend combats training his sword rank.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not very hard to train his sword rank because, there's Onis and Berserkers and his starting maps everywhere. Or you could just use an arm scroll. But that's still time investment, resource investment. I don't know. I was never huge on it.
Okay, yeah, I get that. The other weapons that Leo might want to be using, Lightning is the other one that you can get without Paralogs. And Lightning also kind of struggles with hit. Lightning has 75 hit, which is not ideal, but the effect that Lightning has is...
It's a brave weapon!
It's a brave weapon. It lets you hit twice or 4 times if you double. And that makes it really, really powerful on player phase when it's usable, especially against tough, wary fighter enemies like Generals and Stoneborn. Those are 2 enemy types that are really, really hard to one round because you can't double them. But Lightning lets you double them, so suddenly they're not an issue. And I would say, since, Lightning is a player phase weapon, its effect only works on player phase, you can get more hit stacking tools for the situations where you can use lightning. You can have a lot of adjacency partners and you get hit from that, or you can position, Benny next to someone, or obviously, since it's Leo, you can have Heartseeker applied, even if they're a 2-range enemy. So that works out pretty nicely. And it gives him a niche that his Fire Tome or his Levin Sword can't replicate as nicely.
Getting access to lightning is extremely valuable. Obviously, there's just, even say as a dual strike partner, it's not so bad, because a lot of the enemies that you're going to want to have Leo be using lightning on are enemies that have no avoid, right? Generals in Someborn are super slow, and that really plays into Leo's strengths as a unit, or I guess rather it plays into his weaknesses, because he obviously is going to be struggling to hit in a lot of situations where he's not using the Fire Tome, or not having other skills active. However, that's not really a problem in the situations where he needs to be using this tome, because he doesn't need to use them on fast enemies. There's one situation where I do think that lightning can pose as a problem for Leo, and that is if you're fighting chapter 25 enemies with it, because those enemies are fast. He is not going to be able to double them in a lot of situations, probably, and he's going to be at weapon triangle disadvantage. That is probably one of the harder things for Leo to overcome. However, I don't think it's actually that impossible, if I remember right, for him to actually get decent hit rates with the Lightning Tome on player phase for some Sword Masters or something.
I'd be interested to see that. That sounds kind of funny.
Bet I'll do that later, straight up.
Yeah. Chapter 25 is honestly one of Leo's worst maps, but that's fine. We forgive him because he's good everywhere else.
Speaking of Chapter 25, Calamity Gate.
Ooh, I don't like the Calamity Gate. Go on.
I don't either. But, double weapon triangle advantage is never bad. It's really, really good and extremely powerful. Obviously, all the bonuses you get from weapon triangle getting doubled is a lot of bonuses. The issue kind of comes from the Calamity Gate's hit. It's 70 hit, which doesn't sound as bad. Well, obviously we were just glazing, Lightning Tome with 75 hit. However, the situations where Leo is going to be using the Calamity Gate a lot of the time are on enemy phase heavy maps, like Chapter 17 is just enemy phase everywhere, Master Ninjas everywhere, and he's going to be wanting to use the Calamity Gate a lot of the time there, and his hit rate is still going to suffer. Even sometimes at advantage, it can suffer, because he's still fighting extremely fast enemies all the time with this weapon. The only situations where it's really strong are against Spear Masters, and I do think that against Spear Masters that this is a good weapon. However, it's just not as valuable as it sounds, really. That is a nice boon to have, but you can really just skip having this. He doesn't really need it.
Okay, I would like to offer some dissent. I don't think the Calamity Gate is good against Spear Masters.
Really?
So the thing with the Calamity Gate is it's going to be used against blue enemies, right? And like Blue talked about, it's not going to be very accurate against the dagger and shuriken users that you want to be using it against, especially if there's some Sword Masters mixed into that. He's going to have 40, not 40, but maybe 60% hit against the Sword Masters, and that's really bad. So you'd think Lances would be the better weapon type to use the Calamity Gate against. But Leo doesn't really need weapon triangle advantage against those enemies, because they're going to be attacking at one range.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that means Heartseeker is going to be applied. So the Fire Tome is more reliable, not in terms of hit. They're both going to be at 100% hit, but the Fire Tome won't crit, so it will never deny himself guard gauge. And we already talked about how Leo is a unit that disproportionately hates critting and screwing over his guard gauge. It's at least nice that he has more bulk, so it's not as bad as it sounds, but it's not really worth it. I don't think it outclasses the Fire Tome at the thing that the Calamity Gate is supposed to be good at, except against spear enemies. But as we said earlier, Leo can just fight the spear enemy on player phase, and then it's not going to attack him at range. So I just don't think the Calamity Gate has a niche whatsoever.
It is worth noting, too, that spear enemies get lower natural avoid, because the spear gives you -10 avoid.
Is that true?
Yeah. You want to look it up?
I'm gonna look it up. Oh shit, you're right.
Yeah, so the spear does give you less avoid. That's actually a very good point. Leo specifically does not really care too much about the Calamity Gate. I was looking in the lens of the Calamity Gate with no users versus the Calamity Gate with Leo specifically. I do think that the Calamity Gate is still decent against Spear Masters, but probably not as important on Leo specifically as a mage, because he's gonna be okay. He's gonna be alright. He's gonna get decent hit regardless, and I do think that it's not the worst weapon for him, but it's not gonna be like as valuable as you may think it might be. It's definitely one of the most overrated weapons. Speaking of overrated, this fucking horse. Dude, this thing sucks. Genuinely. It's so bad. Like, okay, the extra defense can be nice, the extra speed can be nice, but that's about where the benefits end. Because what's the horse's hit rate? It's 70. And, you know, obviously he wants weapons with higher hit rate. The horse spirit cannot be forged. Fire can be forged. The horse spirit has like 3 might. And the extra skill that it gives isn't really going to outpace the amount of extra hit that a fire tome is going to give you. Why are you using this thing? The only time you would ever want to use this thing is for an extra speed benchmark, which is so easy to get. You do not need this thing. It is so useless on Leo. Like, it is probably the most overrated weapon, I think, in Fates, maybe, because it's just like, what is it doing for you, really? It's a complete placebo effect. All of its bonuses, aside from maybe the extra bulk, is like, whatever.
Yeah, I completely agree. The horse spirit makes you better at hitting the stat thresholds that are already easy to hit, and worse at hitting the important ones. If there are any bulk thresholds, the horse spirit helps you hit, not reliably, because again, crits. I cannot hammer that point home enough. So it's really never worth the trade-off compared to the fire tome. The fire tome is going to be Leo's best weapon in 95% of situations, and that just kind of proves it.
So obviously the big comparison that people are going to make between Leo is versus the other Dark Mage you get in Conquest, which is Odin.
Only one. There's only one other Dark Mage.
Yep, there's only one other Dark Mage. The other one isn't a Dark Mage.
That's true! True!
Yeah, Odin is the popular pick, say, for being your token magic unit. Because obviously he joins very early. You can get a lot of early training on him, and, you know, he has a lot of hit, he has a lot of luck, and, you know, he's a good user of things like Nosferatu early on. You know, he has a lot of defense, he has a lot of HP. He's sort of like Leo in the early game before you have him. And that can kind of get him to snowball into something that can feel comparable to Leo. However, he is not Leo. And I think that he is actually much worse, because he needs a lot more help to really get off the ground past Leo's join time, notably in his magic. They have comparable speed stats, which is on its own not that bad. It's pretty easy to fix speed. However, Odin has the extra caveat of needing to really fix his magic in order to be a strong magical unit. He is going to naturally have more strength than he will have magic, and unless he pretty much chugs spirit dust, it's going to be hard for him to actually catch up to Leo in base magic alone.
I think there's this perception among some players that a trained Odin will be comparable to a base Leo. And I think that's just completely inaccurate. Leo kind of completely eclipses Odin in some pretty important areas. Those are going to be magic and resistance. And resistance doesn't sound big, but resistance is actually the big one in this case, because that's what gives Leo his niche of being able to handle any mixed enemy group that Odin, with his 13 resistance in Dark Knight, just cannot replicate. He's gonna get chunked a lot harder by magic enemies, so he doesn't have as much of an enemy phase niche. And he needs a lot of stats fixed at the same time. He needs more magic, more speed, and in a lot of cases, more bulk. And it's gonna be really hard to give him everything he wants. So that's why someone like Leo, who pretty much just wants speed, is gonna be a lot easier to work with. Now, the big niche that Odin has over Leo is hit rates, and this was also the big niche that Leo had over Xander. But I'd say Leo's at the point in hit rates with the Fire Tome where he's not going to need that much hit fixing in a lot of situations. Xander's the kind of guy who probably wants some hit fixing to reach 100%. Odin has overkill hit, so he's kind of wasting his skill and luck stats, and he'd really prefer to distribute that into his other stats, like magic and resistance.
Odin, like, he's not going to match Leo ever in being a Dark Knight, so I would say that there is a case for where if you want to have a tank Odin, you're going to want to put him in Sorcerer and you can have him use Nos. But then he runs into the problem of using a weapon that cannot, under any circumstance, double. Meaning, Leo's still going to outpace Odin in not only speed, but reliability. Because while Odin's still going to have good hit rates with Nosferatu, he's going to be relying on doing multiple enemy phases between a lot of different enemies, which can still be pretty sketchy compared to someone who can just go in, kill them all with a guard gauge and be fine. You have to be a lot more conscious with Odin for doing like big enemy phases like that. When Leo, you can just stick a pair up on him and hold forward. And that's kind of the big difference between the two. Like, Odin is just so much more effort. And I think Conquest is a very effort-based meta. The more effort you put into something, the better they're going to be. However, the easier a unit performs without effort, I believe, to just generally be stronger because you don't have to think about it. And Leo is that unit.
I would say there are niches that Odin does better than Leo, but they're not as powerful. You know, you might think maybe Odin can get use out of those lower accuracy weapons that we just talked about, like the Horse Spirits or Nosferatu. The thing with that is it's gonna cut into his kill power a lot. The Horse Spirit has low might, and combined with Odin's already low magic, makes him pretty bad at killing enemies. And Nosferatu, like Luke said, can't double, so it's really not ideal. And this is where I differ from Luke a bit, because I don't think that has anything to do with effort. I think that he just performs worse.
And, like, a lot of the things that Odin runs into, right? Obviously, Conquest has so many Spirit Dusts. So he can, like, chug a bunch of them and be fine. But then you can just make the same argument for Leo, right? Leo can chug a bunch of Spirit Dust and he's going to be fine. And the difference between the two, and just saying that, is that in order to fix Leo's stats, he doesn't really need that to be compared to other units. He doesn't need anything. He does not want resources, which is like kind of just so huge because he just meets everything pretty naturally. The only thing that you might want to give him is like a speed wing to meet speed thresholds a bit easier, or maybe like without meals if you're not playing with that. But in general, he just outstats Odin in so many other areas where it really matters that it really isn't much of a competition, I feel like. Being
less resource hungry is actually kind of big, since I would say Spirit Dusts are contested. I don't think Odin is the best user of them. I would say Camilla and Niles both make better cases than Odin for them. So I'd say Leo not being in that competition pool is pretty big. This is obviously all focusing solely on after Leo joins. If we are comparing these two in a tiering context, this is probably where we bring up how Odin's early game contributions compare, which is an interesting discussion in its own right, but entirely outside the scope of this video, so we'll leave it there. The reason we brought him up in the first place is to clear up probably the most important misconception about Leo. He's not a free, weaker version of another unit you could have already trained a la Shura. He is genuinely very unique in his role, and even a unit as superficially similar as Odin just can't do what he does. Now that we're done with that, we can have a look at a less unbalanced comparison.
Okay, so Leo is notably a mage killer. He has a lot of resistance. He has a skill, which we have not talked about yet, with the Brynhildr, that allows him to randomly just take, I believe it's half damage from any magical attack. So, obviously he is never going to run into issues with being able to, fight enemy sorcerers. The other notable mage killer is Kaze. Kaze also has a shit ton of res. He has a shit ton of speed. And His low strength doesn't really matter against sorcerers, because sorcerers are not that bulky. Especially with like a strength pair up, Kaze's gonna be fine. However, in general, I think Leo is the good fallback plan. Obviously, I think that Kaze is actually a better dedicated mage killer than Leo is. Like, if you look at these comparisons, like, Kaze is going to be generally more accurate, more reliable, more resistant against mage groups. The benefit to Leo is that he can still do it, but he can also do it in mixed groups. Kaze does not really do well at all in mixed groups. He can't enemy phase physical enemies pretty much at all without guard gauge, like specific guard gauge timing, because he has 11 defense. it's really not good. I think Kaze is like Leo, where obviously he's just extremely zero investment, easy to use, has one purpose, and he serves that purpose really well. And then Leo is like Kaze plus, where he trades a little bit of what Kaze can do against mages, however, is extremely better against pretty much every other enemy type in the game. In general, Leo is going to outperform Kaze as a enemy phaser, because that's generally what both of them are going to be doing. Kaze has a lot less, for lack of a better term, he has a lot less elbow room for being able to do a lot of those big enemy phases.
This kind of comes back to the sort of generalist versus specialist conversation we had with Silas last video. Maybe last video. I might upload something in between, where, you know, Kaze is more dedicated for specific enemy types, but Leo's still very good against those enemy types, especially since sorcerers and Onmyojis are not very fast, so Leo doesn't need a lot of speed stacking to double them, and they're both going to be fine on the survivability front. Kaze will be more accurate, which is actually pretty important, but what's nice about Leo is he has 2 more movement, so he's better at making forward pushes in tandem with those large enemy phases. And when I say forward push, normally what I'm referring to is a big player phase sweep. That's not what I'm referring to with Leo. I mean, he's very good at just going from enemy group to enemy group without needing to take any downtime in between them. So he's going to be a lot faster at getting from place to place, which is really nice.
Yeah, Leo is just an extremely hold forward kind of unit. And in some situations, Kaze is going to be like that, but you have to be a lot more careful, because obviously Kaze can die a lot easier. He's a lot squishier than Leo is to physical units. And while both of them do the same thing, it's just Leo does it more.
That's kind of what sets him apart from, like, the other kind of mixed tank guy that we looked at. Silas is going to be a lot higher investment at trying to replicate the things that Leo and Kaze can do. And Leo's going to have a lot of niches that Silas doesn't.
Yeah, for sure.
And we've been gassing up Leo's enemy phase potential a lot. So I just wanted to take a look at how that looks in practice on, in this case, Chapter 24. This is a forecast against a Kinshi Knight. This is nothing close to the full story. I'll be having some footage going on in the background of Leo sweeping the entire left side of Chapter 24. And that's really a good way to demonstrate Leo's performance as a mixed tank. He can survive the Onmyojis and the Onis in that quadrant very well. And then a turn or two later, when the Kinshis roll around, he can fight them very well. So what I think is really nice about Leo as a Juggernaut is he's very good at just taking on these flanks on his own, so that you can dedicate a lot of your other units to pushing forward with your main army. Leo's a very good flanker, I would say.
Yeah, and especially with the late game in Leo's base kit, he notably gets Life Taker, which we have not talked about yet. Obviously, he's going to be doing a lot of these big enemy phases, like we're saying. However, he's not invincible. He won't survive forever without any healing whatsoever. He just gets free healing in his base kit. So in these late game maps where enemies are going to eventually do damage, where that gets like really racked up, on player phase, he can just kill an enemy real quick and then heal 50% of his HP. Which, more cases than not, is going to be enough healing for him to just completely survive the next enemy phase, because he has a lot of HP too. And that gets even further boosted if you give him HP tonics.
Leo's very good at just taking on these side passages separated from the rest of your army. He's a very, very self-sufficient unit with Life Taker and just with his bonkers array of stats. And the ability to do stuff like this without needing to have like a rally bot and a staffer trail behind him all the time is actually really nice, because it means you can dedicate more actions for the rest of your army on the really threatening enemy groups. Leo's good at just doing what needs to be done, but isn't as direct towards the objective, I would say. And then, at Leo's peak performance...
Oh, here it is! No way!
Probably the funniest and also maybe best niche that he has is on endgame. Leo has so many stats in exactly the right places to where he has very good matchups against axe users like the endgame Oni Savages, to where he can one-round all of them on enemy phase through 2 enfeebles. So he is -8 in every stat, and it simply does not matter. Leo has the stats to just pull through anyway, and that's what's so amazing about him. This is the kind of thing that really few other units can replicate. This is just a display of Leo's raw power in just his base kit. Without reclassing at all, Leo performs better than like 80% of units in the cast, which is really funny.
It's extremely valuable to have a unit like this, because obviously Conquest is a very resource-heavy game. If you do not build your units that much, you are going to have a harder time. The game is very reliant on skills and different classes and weapons and stuff. Leo really does not care about that much. He's just chilling in his base class, and you can kind of just have him do his own thing and really be an incredibly reliable crutch for any real problems that you may run into on a map.
Leo is a very free, low effort, low investment unit. He doesn't require a lot out of you, but the reward that he puts out is absolutely massive. He's really one of the few units in the game I would recommend not reclassing in most playthroughs. There are things he can get out of reclassing. He likes flight on maps like 20 and 21. He likes the skills from Outlaw and Cavalier, but he doesn't need them to put out a truly ridiculous output. That's something very unique about him, compared to even units like Xander. Xander's a unit I would recommend reclassing more often than not. Or Camilla. Camilla likes Malignite a lot, but it's not, I would say, her best final class. Leo just asks nothing of you and gives everything in return.
Yeah, and not many units are really going to be able to really do it like he does, because the fact that you just get this insanely powerful magic unit, he doesn't even cost a Master Seal. He doesn't even need a Master Seal. That's the most insane part. He costs literally $0 for him to be at his peak performance. That is just something incredible, and I think that more people should give him credit for that.
Yeah, Leo is easily, in my opinion, the most underrated Norian Royal. I think it's interesting because everyone I know who plays this game acknowledges Leo is good, but I think very few realize
to the extent of like how hard he can really just carry your run for no thought at all. It takes no planning. You just stick a speed pair up on him and kind of just let him go.
He's just that guy. He's very dependable, and that's really such a great thing. So that'll be it. Luke.
Oh, I fucking hate tomatoes, man, dude. I forgot about that. Whatever. I don't care. No, my throat hurts. I don't want to do it right now.
You want to close this out anyway?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, that'll be it from us. Be sure to check out Ant's channel for more videos like this. Be sure to check out my channel for a lot of videos, not about Conquest, but I have a lot of videos on Birthright and Revelation, doing some challenge runs for that. I may one day eventually come back to YouTube to do a Conquest run. Maybe. Hopefully. Maybe. But, yeah, I don't upload. So, yeah. I do have a catalog of stuff, but it's not really particularly relevant to the discussion here. But, it still fates.
Yeah, that'll close us out. See you later.